On this Wednesday, New York City has a new designated mayor and the Democratic Party a renewed sense of purpose. Voters have elected 34-year-old Zohran Mamdani to be the city's youngest leader in generations, and he'll become the city's first Muslim mayor. Mamdani, a self-proclaimed democratic socialist, said his victory was a step towards defeating President Donald Trump.
Zohran Mamdani's win follows a meteoric political rise. Once a long-shot candidate, he's now set to be New York's first Muslim and first South Asian mayor.
New York will remain a city of immigrants, a city built by immigrants, powered by immigrants, and as of tonight, led by an immigrant. So hear me, President Trump, when I say this. To get to any of us, you will have to get through all of us.
Mamdani energised New York voters during his campaign, promising to fight back against Donald Trump's anti-immigration policies and to address the skyrocketing cost of living in the United States' biggest city. A self-described socialist, he's vowed to freeze some rents, make buses free and offer public childcare. While critics have pointed to his lack of experience and the challenges in delivering on ambitious promises, many voters are hopeful.
A large chunk of my income goes towards public transit. And so if there's a way to, lessen the price for that, which Mamdani's going to do for us, I'm there for it 100%.
Has directly addressed Trump and his abuse and power. Congress has failed to do so. Mamdani has now placed himself above Congress as a national leader, and he hasn't even taken office yet.
Donald Trump loomed large over the election in his home city. He made his dislike of Mamdani clear, calling him a communist, and threatened to withhold federal funding if he won, quickly sharing his thoughts on Mamdani's win on social media. Democrats, though, are celebrating. Elizabeth Warren and Hillary Clinton among those to share their congratulations. The mayoralty marks a win in their struggle to gain traction after Trump was re-elected. It wasn't the only success of the night for Democrats, with candidates winning high-profile races in Virginia and New Jersey too. While the wins all came in typically blue states, they'll be hoping the momentum can last and boost the party's chances ahead of next year's midterm elections.
Julius van der Laar is a campaign strategist and political commentator. In 2008 and 2012, he worked on the campaigns of Barack Obama. It's great to have you on the show. Now, as a campaign strategist yourself, how did Mamdani pull it off?
Man, he did everything right. I think the quintessential aspect was that he was laser focused. In American politics, you always say it's all about the economy. I think this time it was all about affordability. He had one great message. He said, everything is too expensive and I'm going to lower the cost. By the way, basically the same message that Donald Trump had in 2024 as well.
His communications consultant said that, winning in the way that they did was all about two things: having an enemy and having an agenda. As someone who's, been down this path a couple of times yourself, is it that easy?
I think it is, to be frank. You got to have an enemy. There's no great story without an antagonist. Just take Star Wars, for example. You can't have Luke Skywalker without Darth Vader. And I think they figured it out. But I would argue that they had two enemies. One, of course, is the one in the White House, where Mamdani clearly said this is not the path forward. But he also had the enemy that was closer to the people and to the reality of folks facing in New York, and that is the rent is too high, public transport sucks, and it's too expensive, and I'm going to lower the cost.
Now, his agenda has been billed as communist by his opponents, and a lot of Democrats had a really hard time endorsing him because they considered his agenda as too radical. Now, from the European perspective, we're talking in Berlin today, is it really that radical, or is it more akin to the social democracy that we know here, which is the basis of the welfare state in Europe?
I think it's always hard to compare German or European politics with U.S. politics, but I would say from a pure agenda perspective, it is pretty similar what Zohran Mamdani is proposing to what a lot of people are living in right here over in Europe. But I understand why the Democrats are skeptical, wrapping their arms around Zohran Mamdani and his agenda. And I think we saw it also from several people who said, there's been great victories, but they kind of left out Zohran Mamdani in New York because they're just too worried that Donald Trump, the Republicans, in the lead up to the midterm elections are going to say, this is what you're going to get, crazy communism that we don't want in the United States of America.
But that's not what it is, right? No. So do you think this is a blueprint that maybe Democrats across the country will now emulate, seeing that this really worked in New York? Or is New York an odd one out in this case?
I think it is an odd one out. I think affordability is something that is true for most cities all throughout the United States. And again, Donald Trump ran on saying, it's hard to fill up your pickup truck. I'm going to Jill, baby Jill, to make sure that your costs are lowered. So it's the same basic message. But I think Democrats need to be careful what they learned from this election night last night. You can also look to Abigail Spanberger in Virginia or New Jersey, and those are both, I'd argue, moderate Democrats who also won and outperformed their polling. So I think it always depends on, all politics is local. What's relevant to the audience that I'm trying to address? That is, of course, a short-term gain. Long-term, Democrats need to figure out, as they're in the lead-up to 2028 and the general election, what is the top of the ticket? Which direction does the party want to go?
You mentioned Abigail Spanberger there. She won the election in Virginia by a larger margin than expected, and we actually have a soundbite from her. Let's bring that up.
We sent a message to every corner of the Commonwealth. A message to our neighbors and our fellow Americans across the country. We sent a message to the whole world that in 2025, Virginia chose pragmatism over partisanship. We chose our Commonwealth over chaos.
That was Virginia's governor-elect Abigail Spanberger. Does that sound to you like the Democrats have their groove back?
Well, I think they figured out that Donald Trump is slipping in the polls. And if they can make it a referendum about Donald Trump and saying he's creating chaos, whether it's ICE and the whole deportations that are taking place, or whether it's the economy that is not performing the way he's presented and promised during his election, I think they're trying to make it a referendum and betting on that the polls are going to continue to slip for Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm. Is that going to be enough?
I don't think so. I think you can run against Donald Trump and mobilize and galvanize the base, but at some point you got to have your own agenda. You got to actually say what you're for. Bill Clinton in 1992, he said elections are about the future. They're not about the past. And Zohran Mamdani was a candidate for the future. Andrew Cuomo, his opponent in New York, was clearly the past. And I think that's what they're betting on, that people, by the time the election in 2028 rolls around, that they're saying, I've had enough of Donald Trump. There's been too much chaos, too much just quagmire. I want something new. But the Democrats have to define what new looks like.
Do you think the elections of last night are putting us any closer to that internal battle being settled, of, really charting a path forward here?
Right. I mean, there's one person who clearly says this has been the igniting moment, and that is Gavin Newsom out in California. There was also a referendum on the ballot in California, Prop 50. It was all about redistricting and how electoral districts are being cut. And that was, for a long time, a close call. And he said, I want to do that in order to balance the map compared to what the Republicans had proposed. And he won as well. So he's saying, clearly people have spoken out. We see him here in the background. And Gavin Newsom says, this is the energy that we wanted. So he wants to make it about pragmatic politics from California. Zohran Mamdani wants to say we need to sort of move to the left. And I think that's the fight the Democrats are going to have for the next year or 2 years until they decide who the nominee is going to be.
We actually have Gavin Newsom here. Let's listen in.
Instead of agonizing over the state of our nation, we organized in an unprecedented way in a 90-day sprint. People from all over the United States of America contributed their voices and their support for this initiative. We stood tall and we stood firm in response to Donald Trump's recklessness. People waiting up 3 hours to cast their vote. to send a message to Donald Trump. No crowns, no thrones, no kings. That's what this victory represents. It's a victory for the people of the state of California and the United States of America.
All right, Gavin Newsom, for quite some time now, has been styling himself as Donald Trump's top antagonist. Right. Is he the leading figure the Democrats are looking for and that the Democratic Party, frankly, needs right now?
They need a leader, and he wants to be that leader. I mean, he's been saying, well, this is all about the people who voted. This is also about him. He wants that job. He wants to move to the White House. He wants to get that nomination. And he's making the argument, look, I've organized this. People have come out to vote, and I want to be de facto the nominee of the Democratic Party. He's got to do some work for that. But I also thought it was interesting, the day before the election, there was actually an Instagram video posted by Gavin Newsom. And he said, the day after Election Day, all of us, the pundits, the journalists, are going to talk about Election Day. And they're going to say Democrats won all over the country, in Virginia, in New Jersey, in California. He left out one place, and that was, of course, New York City. He didn't mention Zohran Mamdani, because he, of course, wants to create some distance. He thinks that the democratic socialism of Zohran Mamdani is basically a nuclear waste, and he just doesn't want to talk about it, doesn't want to get involved in it. So I think he's making a big sort of turn around it.
Is it a mistake, though? Because the messaging is remarkably different, you know, either side of the coast. What resonates more with Americans at this point in time? Is it Gavin Newsom, who, to some extent, really is taking his communications cues from the White House, right? He's trying to beat Donald Trump at his own game. It's very aggressive, often a little tongue-in-cheek. And then we have Zohran Mamdani really with his enthusiastic, positive message. So what is it Americans want right now?
Well, America, as you know, is huge. And I think what Gavin Newsom is focused on right now, what is playing on social media and in the media in general. I think his strategies and tactics have been working pretty well. If you look at the polling markets and the betting markets, he's moving up in the polls, and the probability that he's going to be the nominee, it's way too early to tell. But given the fact that you got to look at the calendar of the primary process, where do people vote first? It's probably going to be South Carolina, and it's going to be elderly black ladies in Greenwood, South Carolina, and in Greenville. And the question is, who are they going to be electing? Is it going to be the governor from a very successful state who's also liberal, or is it going to be a democratic socialist? And I think he's already playing the agenda and the calendar that's going to be taking place in the lead up to the nomination fight.
All right. I know you're not looking for a job, but, you know, the midterms are coming up.
That's right.
If you had one recommendation to give the Democrats going into this election cycle, a lot is at stake, what would it be?
I'd figure out how to capture the energy. And you can say that about Gavin Newsom, who's figured out, at least in a digital way, to capture the imagination and the attention economy. And Zohran Mamdani gave a lot of people hope. If you look at the turnout, the voter turnout in New York City, record high, largest turnout since 1968. So clearly there's something happening there. And I think it's a combination of what we learned earlier. You got to have an enemy, you got to have an agenda, but you also got to be a charismatic leader who actually believes what he's saying. That was the big problem Democrats had in the last cycle, where they've been hiding Joe Biden. On this program, we talked about it. Joe Biden should have long left the playing field and opened it up for somebody else. I think they lost a lot of trust. And I think people are looking for politicians right now who are authentic, who are credible, and who have a message that they carry out. And Zohran Mamdani certainly had that, just like Donald Trump had it in 2024 as well.
Julius van der Laar, always great to get your insights. Thanks so much for coming in today.
And DW's Benjamin Alvarez Gruber is in New York City for us. Benjamin, so this is the day after the Democrats swept the first big election in Trump's second term. What is the atmosphere like in New York City where you are?
The day after, indeed, for a city that many call the city that never sleeps. It's slowly starting to move here again. We're, as you can see, on Brooklyn on the other side of the river. But of course, huge celebration. Many of Zohran Mamdani's supporters stayed up very late, waiting outside of the venue where he gave this speech, this rather strong speech, appealing to his voters and also talking directly to President Trump. He said, I have 4 words for President Trump: turn the volume up. With this campaigning, with this messaging that made him the star, basically, of his party here in New York. And that's also quite remarkable for a man that was widely unknown to a majority of people in New York, to be the favorite of being the mayor and now being the mayor-elect. But of course now the harder part start, because there's one thing promising many things that were appealing for New Yorkers, and another one of delivering on these promises.
And Benjamin, I understand that U.S. President Donald Trump, he has just spoken with Republican senators. Did he comment on Mamdani's victory?
He did. He commented on it yesterday with 2 social posts on social media. And he also said today, when he invited Republican senators to the White House, he said last night was not expected to be a victory. I don't think it was good for Republicans. I'm not sure it was good for anybody, but we had an interesting evening and we learned a lot. What's very interesting here is that he mentioned also yesterday on one of this posts that one of the reasons probably for the defeat of the Republicans is the government shutdown. It is now the longest in U.S. history, and that's quite frankly interesting, because Republicans have always pushed the blame game, saying that it's a Democrats' fault that the government has not reopened. But this is giving hints that this shutdown is pushing negatively on the Republican Party. So there will be some interesting discussions happening there now, not just to talk about the race here, but also of the 2 races of governors in New Jersey and also of Virginia, 2 Democratic women. And probably they will also talk about California, where this redistricting push by the Democrats also was passed.
And I'm wondering, Benjamin, is there anything that President Trump could do now moving forward? I mean, do we know what his options are?
So we can imagine that it will be a quite tense relationship between the mayor of New York starting on January 1st when he takes over and the White House, President Trump, shortly before Election Day, saying that he would withdraw federal funds from New York to the minimum that is legally required. There have been some rumors. There's also something that Andrew Cuomo played with, of saying that the National Guard would be sent to New York. That are rumors, but as we've seen with other cities led by Democrats, he has usually threatened that he would send in the National Guard, that he would make many decisions in the White House and not let the people here and the mayor of New York take many decisions directly here. We've seen that in Chicago with a Democratic mayor. We've seen that also in Los Angeles or in others where he said that he will send in the National Guard. But it remains to be seen how that relationship will unfold.
And Benjamin, we know that the task ahead for the mayor-elect Mamdani is huge. Has he told us, has he said how he will deliver on his campaign promises? Free buses, free childcare. It sounds great. How's he going to do it?
He sounds great, but will he be able to do it? And that's one of the biggest points of his critics, saying that he will not be able to fulfill some of his promises because not all of them are actually in his hand. When he says that he will tax the rich, we have the governor of New York saying that she will not do that. And he might need to convince several other people to push with his agenda to be able to fulfill it when it comes to free buses, when it comes to childcare, when it comes to stores, shops that he wants in the city with food for citizens. So he will need to be able to convince many people on the Transport Authority, also others in the council here, to push through with his agenda and to have that support. But it's not easy. It won't be easy for him. But what this election victory for Zohran Mamdani showed, that he managed to appeal to the needs of many New Yorkers, including high rents here in the city. But we'll have to see if he will actually be able to manage expectations and to fulfill these promises. But it's really remarkable. It was a remarkable night for Democrats with these 4 victories in New Jersey, in Virginia, in California, and here in New York. But now the harder part kicks in after the celebrations that will probably still be ongoing for a couple of days to see how he can fulfill those promises and how he can prepare a team here to take over to be the mayor of New York starting on January 1st of next year.
DW's Benjamin Alvarez Gruber with the latest for us on this morning after a remarkable election in New York City. Benjamin, thank you.
Let's bring in Karen Sebold. She's an assistant professor of political science at the University of Arkansas. Welcome back to DW, Karen. Now, what was it about Mamdani's campaign that spoke to voters?
Well, first off, I'd like to say thank you for having me back. I always enjoy talking about American politics on your station. And certainly, as you heard from those clips, those kitchen table issues related to affordable housing, affordable transportation, and things related to the cost of living really seem to boost his campaign. But we also have to look at the fact that he is the youngest mayor in probably 100 years in New York City. And a lot of these youthful voters see him as a political outsider. So he's a political outsider. He's bucking the status quo. That is what a lot of these young voters and these disaffected voters really want to see, is somebody challenge Donald Trump in a serious way, and by focusing on the issues and not stooping necessarily to his level and having this tit for tat back and forth on TikTok or Twitter.
Yeah, he challenged the establishment and won. Now the hard work begins. It will be an uphill battle for him to deliver on his campaign promises. They're very ambitious. How do you think he'll fare?
Well, it is going to be tough for him because New York City is a large city government. It is one of the largest governments in the world. So with that being said, it comes with a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of bureaucratic inertia. So he is going to have to somehow take the skills that he developed winning this campaign and now turn those into skills related to governing. And that's going to be difficult because there are so many multifaceted issues related to the cost of living in New York City. And so he is going to have to stay focused on these issues, really cut out the noise. There's a lot of other issues he could get to, but maybe he doesn't do that in this first term. And try not to just turn this into a war against Donald Trump, because there could be some backlash and some resentment against him if he stays focused on that versus the issues he focused on during his campaign.
The president has, of course, threatened to cut funding to New York. He has made it very clear that he will try and make Mamdani's life as difficult as possible. What else could he do to derail Mamdani's vision for New York?
Well, certainly, yeah. Cutting off federal funding is one of the biggest things he could do. That would certainly hurt this city. But also there are other things he could, kind of speak to his partners, his allies, and convince them to no longer do business in New York City. He could threaten that for sure, as well as he could threaten to send in ICE troops to start conducting raids on the immigrant populations. So these are things that are going to have serious consequences if Donald Trump follows through on his threats.
What kind of leverage does Mamdani have to counter interference from Trump?
Well, first off, he did have a pretty sizable margin of victory last night over someone that is a politically established part of this political dynasty in New York City, the Cuomo family. And so that speaks to something that is real. There are people that are disaffected with the status quo, turned off by the party insiders. And so if he can kind of keep this coalition together of working class people, disaffected voters, youthful voters, minority voters, he could do something like what Obama did 10, 15 years ago, where he really turned the tides against the Republicans and rang in a Democratic victory that had impact on down ballot elections and was a long-term kind of a majority that he held on to. So perhaps he can do what Obama did, keep his coalition together and build on it. Given he was such a relatively new upstart going into the election, there is room for growth, given that people are just starting to recognize that he may be onto something here. So if he can turn that and keep that going, he'll be successful.
Exactly. That would have been my next question. Is he onto something here? And there were so many Democrats who were reluctant to endorse him and who haven't congratulated him on his success in this election. What lessons should the Democrats on, the national level learn from this campaign, and could some part of it serve as a blueprint for the way forward for Democrats who are in deep trouble, frankly?
Yeah, so I think part of it is moving past this war, this entrenched war with Donald Trump. We've got to kind of get away from the culture war issues that Democrats have really worked hard to improve the lives of so many groups of people that are not receiving equal treatment in this country. But those aren't the things that are going to turn out voters to the polls in a way that are going to allow you to defeat the Republican Party. But they do need to take note that, hey, it wasn't just New Jersey, it just wasn't New York and Virginia, but you had some real change in Pennsylvania where the Democrats turned over 3 state Supreme Court seats. You had some decisive victories in Georgia and Mississippi and areas where Democrats haven't done too well. So, if you thread these things together, it looks really positive for the Democrats, but they're going to have to stay focused again on the kitchen table issues, the things that working class voters really care about. And that's where Mamdani really cleaned up in New York versus Cuomo, who did well with wealthier voters.
Another year until the midterms and a lot of work ahead. That was Karen Sebold from the University of Arkansas. Great speaking to you today.
Oh, you too. Thank you.